and I will explain shortly why. But for 80%, we do not know. Maybe there are a lot of officers, but at least 20% are officers among the airborne forces. And for motorized rifles, it's quite the same. It's also around 20%. So we understand that, for example, for military pilots, it's natural because military pilots are usually people who know how to drive the plane, and they're usually officers of higher ranks because they need some time, some experience to drive the battle flight. But for example, for airbornes, it's not that natural. It means that first of all, a lot of airborne forces died, and next that they die like full group dies with the commanding officers usually, and the same comes for the motorized rifles, and that's quite unnatural. And we also understand that it's an indicator of how many soldiers died actually, because, for example, we understand the proportion between the officers and usual soldiers in airborne forces or in motorized rifles, because we know like the group consists of, for example, an officer and 10 usual soldiers on a battle machine. So if the whole machine dies, then we understand that the proportion is 1 to 10 and not 1 to 5, as we can see this here. So probably in our public posts that mourn the fallen soldiers, they usually mourn officers more than they do the same about usual soldiers. So we can assume how many actually died. So it's like a few times more than we could count. But still, this is what we could confirm. We couldn't analyze and predict the actual values, but we can assume. The next thing is that we tried to analyze data for those soldiers where we know the actual date of death. Sometimes it's announced. So for this, it's obvious, but we confirmed that the most casualties Russian army took in the first days of war, actually, and then the battle became less hard for falls. So the actual values here may be not so important because there are a lot of gaps, of course, but still it shows the picture that it diminished with time. So why one of the main goals was to understand why the South and the Far East Russians die most in the war, and probably our idea is that this is because there are simply there are more soldiers, or soldiers from those regions are used mostly in the battles. But why these regions? So probably that happens because those regions are the poorest, one of the poorest in Russia. We do not see many fallen soldiers from the rich Siberian regions or northern regions, because people usually have some work there, and the salaries are much better there. And of course, we don't see it for Moscow region, for Magadan, and for St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is somewhere here, I suppose. Really? Yeah, St. Petersburg also is the median wage in St. Petersburg is, for example, higher than the average over Russia. So not so many people will go to army to fight for something very obscure. The other situation is in the southern and far east regions, which are poor, like Buryatia or Dagestan, because, well, usually for men, it's nothing else to do there. Sometimes not so much well-paid salaries there. So our assumption is that mostly the poor regions and some very depressive regions sent their soldiers much more than the others. And on the other hand, southern regions actually announce much more than the others because it's like in their culture to mourn their fallen soldiers publicly. And you can see that a lot of regions on the south here also announce a lot of fallen soldiers, much more than, for example, European part of Russia does. But there is an exception, which is Chechnya. And we understand that a lot of Chechen soldiers die, but it looks like they do not announce anything. And we also analyzed the age of the fallen soldiers, which is obviously they are quite young. But what is important is that Russian authorities try to say that they are very experienced and professionalized forces used. But what we see is that the mostly die people, young people, and sometimes even very young people, 18 years old, which cannot be professional soldiers just because they're too young to be professionals in 18. They need to be drafted first. And it looks like, of course, there are a lot of experienced soldiers, especially, as I said, for example, pilots. But for airbornes, it's not that. It's not true. We see that even when of course, we don't know age for all confirmed casualties, but for many of them, we understand that they are very young, too young to be experienced soldiers. And also there is a interesting thing is that in some cases, soldiers are buried like a month after they were actually died. So for 300 cases, we know both the date of death and date of the burial. And we see that there is a maximum of 45 days between those events, which is very weird. And we think that in many cases bodies are not recovered, and there are a lot of logistical issues. So you can read the details in our piece, but I want to focus now on actually how we gathered all the data, how we confirmed it. So our main like data source is a huge table with a lot of data, which is gathered by quite a big team of volunteers and of course members of our team. And which data we gather. So first of all, there's a name, and I'll check if I can annotate and show you. I don't know if you see my mouse cursor, but I hope so. So first of all, we try to gather the names of the fallen soldiers. And for us, if we know the name, it's part of the confirmation that this soldier exists and that they actually died. We try to gather, of course, the age and the birth date if it's possible. And we also try to estimate the region. As I said, which is sometimes hard because sometimes it's not clear from which region the message comes. If, for example, if relatives posted about their son, sometimes they do not state the region clearly, and we need to investigate to find it. We also try to estimate the rank and the part of the army group, and of course the date of death, if it's possible. But there's much more. We also try to estimate the place where the soldier died, their birthplace, burial place, date of the burial, some awards if it's possible. Sometimes we confirm the death by the certificate of the award, which is commonly awarded to the died people. Sometimes their relatives publish these awards. And we have here data, which means that this is the minimum data when we know that this person has already died, because sometimes there is no date of death announced, but we know, for example, that at least the publication with death was posted not later than some date. So this is the minimum date when the death of the soldier was already confirmed and known. And we gather as much sources as possible. We try to gather at least two different sources that a person died, but sometimes we do not have two sources. Sometimes we only need to rely on one source, but it has to be quite persuasive. And we also have we also try to like save the evidence, say the copy on some web archive, or we take screenshots, and we also try to gather some private social networks, and of course we have a lot of comments like some additional data about name, family, if it's possible, that can also confirm. So how it looks, how those posts look. These are two common examples. One is the official publication by the authorities. It happens. Here is the Nikolai Lyubimov, who is the governor of Ryazan Oblast in Russia. And he just posts a morning message about one of the fallen soldiers from Ryazan. And on the left is an example of region media, which also covers the death and like mourns it. And it states that the person died and it was confirmed by local authorities or announced by local authorities. So these are two like main sources. Also, it's common that relatives or friends just on their social networks mourn their friends and sons and fathers, and there are a lot of information there, like usually they try to state the date of death. A very weird type of confirmation is when, for example, a school mourns their graduate. Usually it's about like cadet schools, but sometimes it's just a usual school like this one from Design, which stated that we have a bad news, and during the war operation in Ukraine, our graduate blah 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 died in Ukraine. So yeah, a lot of schools confirmed their graduates. Sometimes we need to actually use caches, or it's even sometimes there are weird examples. Then, for example, a photo of the fallen soldier was posted, but it was removed and stayed in some cache, for example, in this social network preview cache. So we try to also find such things because it also helps to confirm the identity and confirm some details about the person. And there are some really interesting examples. For example, there was this video of show. Yeah, so this video showing a table with 55 portraits of an airborne force. Soldiers died, and we tried to confirm those identities and to confirm who actually they were. And we actually didn't know at the time who they were. But one of our readers, after the publication, sent us a photo of a phone screen with a document from the division of Airborne Division with a list of persons, and at least looked like it may be connected with the video with those portraits. It had marks like if the person was buried and some other marks. It was hard, but we tried to gather the names from the document, and we tried then to use social networks to find any proofs and any connections between the names and the portraits. And we actually succeeded. We found like almost everybody on the list by just comparing the portraits with photos online. And we actually found out that we had most of them on the list confirmed by other sources, by publications, by relatives, and so on and so on. But we could add 10 more to the list. And actually, there are just 13 people who we couldn't find. And on the list that we received, there were more people than portraits on the video. And we actually found out that there are 4 people for which their relatives, their parents, actually confirmed the death of the person, but the authorities wouldn't agree. They wouldn't confirm the death officially. So, and the relatives just found the bodies on the photos somewhere on Ukrainian social networks. We don't know what happened, why those 4 weren't confirmed, because we saw the list and many people were buried and confirmed to be dead. But there's an exception. So we spent like 40 hours trying to figure out who are the people on the portraits here, and we could only add 10 more confirmations to our list. So you can estimate how hard sometimes it is to confirm the death of a person, even if we have a photo, for example. We also try to estimate some other things, like, for example, we try to estimate the ranks and the type of army which a person served in. And sometimes it's easy, like in this example on the left, it just stays in the obituary that this person was part of the some airborne division and so on and so on. And sometimes we find a photo of a person with a distinguishing marks, for example, airborne flag on the grave. But usually what we do is that we have these symbols of different army parts, and there are a lot of pieces of cloth, for example, that indicates the same army parts. And sometimes it's also clear. For example, we can see clearly on the photo the type of the logo. For example, it's tank army on the left, and it clearly says that it's paratroopers battalion of the Marines on the right. But sometimes it's also very hard because, for example, we know the name and we saw the post about fallen soldier, and we try to, but there is no indication of like type of rank, and the photo is not clear, so we do not see. We see that the type. We see that it's probably airborne because we see the shirt. But we don't know for sure. So we use a lot of tools like a find clone, for example, to find social networks of the person and find the high resolution photo of the person. And on the high resolution photo, we see the mark of the airborne forces clearly, so we can confirm the rank. But in many cases, it's still not possible. So in our piece, we actually confirmed like only like roughly 700 from almost 2,000 confirmations. We could estimate the ranks, and for I'm not right. Actually, we could confirm more than 1,000, and just for 600 people, we couldn't estimate their ranks. And for some of them, we could estimate at least that 52 of them are officers, but we do not know the type of the army they served in. So that's how we try to estimate everything and how to count and how we try to confirm how many actually Russian soldiers died on the war. So that's it from my side.